Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are beginning Mishna Sukkah today, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1, Mishna Aleph, Mishnah 1. The Mishnah begins, Sukkah Shehi Gavaya Lamayla Mesrim Ama Psula. A sukkah that is high, which means the schach, right? The covering of the sukkah, the schach, which is the main part of the sukkah. The schach is more than 20 sukkah shigavaya lamayla me'esrim amma. A sukkah that is more than 20 amas above the ground, psula, is invalid. What that means is, if there is more than 20 amas, 20 cubits, from the floor of the sukkah to the bottom of the schach, then the sukkah is invalid. They bring down here in the notes, there are various opinions regarding the length of an amma, ranging between 18.9 and 22.7 inches, which very often we just kind of like round it off to 2 feet, but it's not really 2 feet.
30 feet.
It's not really 2 feet. So it really comes out, the 20 amas is, almost 40 feet, okay, depending on which measurement you work with. Now, what is the issue here with the fact that the schach is that high? So the explanation is, I'll read it to you from here. The Torah says, you shall dwell in sukkahs for 7 days, which is interpreted as teaching that a sukkah must be built to last only 7 days. That's how it's interpreted. You shall dwell in sukkahs for 7 days. That means it's a 7-day sukkah. That's it. The building itself. This cannot mean that the sukkah must be built in such a way that it will fall down after exactly 7 days, because it's impossible to predict that. Mm-hmm. Instead, the Torah is teaching that the size of a sukkah must be such that it can be built with makeshift walls and supports that will last only 7 days. It's not a permanent structure. It's a temporary structure. Mm-hmm. That's what it has to be made in such a way that it could be a temporary structure. For this reason, a sukkah higher than 20 amas is not valid, because a sukkah of that height requires walls and supports of a more permanent nature. Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, though, if you decide to make your walls of a sukkah out of steel, right, it's not a problem. The issue is the size. It's not what the sukkah is made out of as much as the height, the dimensions of the sukkah. Can the dimension of the sukkah be dimensions that can be supported by makeshift walls and supports? If that size can be supported by that, it's okay, even if you make it into like a permanent thing. There are people who have the walls of their sukkah, right, are the walls of their house, right? And they have this opening on top of the roof, So the issue is not what it is as much as what's its size could it be made out of temporary material or not? So that's why if it's higher than 20, such a height needs more support. Therefore, it's invalid according to the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Yehuda Machshir. The opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is it's kosher. It's a good sukkah. Why? They explain, because according to Rabbi Yehuda holds your sukkah should be a permanent structure, besides for the roof. The roof has to be schach, but the rest of it needs to be a permanent structure. And therefore, 20 amas is just fine. Okay, the halach is like the Tanna Kama, that it can't be higher than 20. Now, so that's the height limit. The she'ena gavaya asara tvachim. Now, let's say it's not 10 tvachim high. Okay, that means there are less than 10 tvachim from the floor of the sukkah to the bottom of the schach. That is too small. What's the problem? Because the Torah commands us to dwell in the sukkah, and a sukkah is valid only if a person can use it like a regular dwelling. A sukkah less than 10 tvachim high is thus unacceptable, since people do not live in such small spaces. Too cramped. And therefore, you can't call it a dwelling. You're supposed to dwell. That means it needs to be a dwelling, and this can't be considered a dwelling. All right. And how much is a tefach converted into our measurements? So a tefach is 1/6 of an amma. The opinions regarding the length of a tefach range approximately from 3.2 to 3.8 inches. Okay. Now, it's too cramped to live in there, and therefore, again, like you would say, and it is 10 tefachim, which is how much? About it's less than 3 feet. Well, apparently there were people times in the Mishnah that lived in such a small place, but a little smaller than that they didn't. Mm-hmm. All right, now Next part, a little bit more complicated. The she'ein lo shalosh tefanos, if a sukkah does not have 3 walls, the shechamasa meruba b'tzilasa, and the sunlight is greater than its shade, pesula, it is invalid. All right, so what's going on here? So we're saying a sukkah has to have 3 walls. Less than 3 walls, no good. That's derived from words in the Torah. Torah says basukais, 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 and based on those words, we derive 3 walls. Won't get into what the derivation is, but there's 3 walls. Now, what's important to know is something that is, discussed much in the Gemara, brought down here in the Bartanura. And when we say 3 walls, it's not exactly 3 full walls. The dimensions of a sukkah, the inner dimension of a sukkah, we spoke about the minimum height. What about the width? The width is 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim. That's the minimum. Okay. So based on that, you would say your walls have to be 7 tefachim wide, right? And if there's 3 of them, you should have 3 walls of 7 tefachim. But we know from Halacha Moshe Misinai that it doesn't have to be that way. And depending on how you set up your 3 walls, that will make the difference as how to work your sukkah. So let me read it to you here. A little bit complicated. It goes like this. The basic rule is that the minimum width of a sukkah wall is 7 tefachim, but only 2 of the 3 walls need actually be that wide, while the third can be narrower. Now, it depends on how you set these 3 walls up. For example, if 2 of the walls are 7 tefachim wide, and they are positioned at right angles to each other, the third wall need consist only of a board slightly wider than 1 tefach. Just wait. They consist only of a board slightly wider than 1 tefach. This board must be placed a little less than 3 tefachim away from one of the other walls, so that the gap can be considered closed. That's called loved. Loved is when you have a gap less than 3 tefachim. The rule of loved states that a gap of less than 3 tefachim between 2 solid objects is viewed as though it were solid itself. Thus, the board together with the gap forms a wall that is 4 tefachim wide, which suffices for the third wall according to biblical law. Now, here's a picture.
Okay.
This picture.
Okay.
Right? The 2 regular walls are at a right angle. They touch each other. And the smaller wall, which is about a tefach plus, is placed less than 3 tefachim away from one of the walls. If you have a space of less than 3 tefachim, it's considered filled in. So now the total wall you have is going to be a little bit. You have the space of a little less than 3 tefachim. You have a board that's a little wider than a tefach. So together they form 4 tefachim. 4 tefachim is enough to make your wall kosher, midaraisa, according to Torah law. However, if you notice in the picture, if you can see it, right, that the last part here, okay, on the other side of the more narrow wall, they have a tzuras hapesach. They have a pole with another cross beam going over to the top. We know that the halacha is if you make a tzuras hapesach, a door frame, that's like a wall. So the Rabbanan said that you can't just go with the 4 tefachim wall. You have to make it that it's considered a 7 tefach wall. But it's enough to go and make a tzuras hapesach for that. So the rabbis decreed, however, that the narrow wall must be extended another 3 tefachim to complete the minimum 7 tefachim by means of a tzuras hapesach, a frame of a doorway. So that's what they did. At the end, if you go ahead and you set up the frame of a doorway by using, again, you use the side of the small beam, like in this picture. Okay, using the side of the small beam, you put up a pole here, and you put something over on top, a beam on top. That's your tzuras hapesach. That is considered a wall, and now you have a 7 tefach wall. So midaraisa, you didn't have to do that. According to Torah law, the 4 tefachim wall is enough for the third wall. But midarabanan, they said that we should halachically make it be considered a 7 tefach wall, and therefore you do that with a tzuras hapesach by creating a door frame. All right, if that wasn't enough, okay, here is another way that we say you're going to create another wall. Okay. Now, this arrangement that we just said suffices only when the two wide walls are at right angles to each other. If they are parallel to each other, the third narrow wall must include a board somewhat wider than 4 tfachim, placed within 3 tfachim of one of the wide walls. Since the gap is narrower than 3 tfachim, the gap becomes part of the third wall, according to the rule of Lavid, thus extending the wall to be required width of 7 tfachim. In this case, you started off with 2 walls that were not at a right angle in this picture. Okay, they're not at a right angle, they're parallel to each other. Right? So what you got to do then is your board, that's your third wall, cannot just be a tefach plus. It's got to actually be 4 tefachim plus. By being 4 tefachim plus wide, and then you put it within less than 3 tefachim of one of the walls, Lavid fills in the space, and then you have a 7 tefach wall. Okay? So in this picture, right, the original walls were parallel to each other, and then you added the other wall, which was 4 tefachim plus, you place it within less than 3 tefachim of one of the regular walls, and that will now create your 7 tefach wall. Okay, that is the elaboration on this part of the mission that says that it has to have at least 3 walls. Now, the next halacha is v'shahamasa meruba mitzilasa. You need that the shade should be more than the sunlight. Okay, that is, the sunlight area on the floor of the sukkah is larger than the shadows formed by the schach when the sun is directly overhead. If that's what happens when the sun is directly overhead, you have on the floor more sunlight than shadow formed by the schach. It's puzzle. It has to be that on the floor you're going to have more shade than sunlight. The Mishnah implies that if the sunlight areas and shadows would be equal, the sukkah would be valid, because it only says that the sunlight is more than the shade. If they'd be even, you'd be good. This is because a ray of light widens slightly after going through a hole. Thus, if the sunlit areas and shadows on the floor would be equal, that means that the solid schach material on top of the sukkah must be larger than the open space. For if they were equal on top, there would be more light than shade on the bottom, because the light spreads. Since the top of the sukkah has more solid schach than empty space, the sukkah is valid. Okay? So you have to have more filled in space on top, and that's how you're going to have your equal sunlight and shadow on the bottom. Okay? The Mishnah continues. Sukkah yeshana, an old sukkah. What's an old sukkah mean? It means a sukkah that a person made long before Sukkot, which he presumably built without intending to use it for the mitzvah. He made a hut, and he made a thatched roof on it. That's what he made. Beis Shammai Poislin. Beis Shammai said it's invalid. Why? Because they hold a sukkah has to be built for the sake of the mitzvah. Ubeis Hillel machshirin. Beis Hillel say no intent necessary. You had it up before. It was your outdoor hut for some reason. It's not a problem. Now, meaning again, you just made this hut. The Ezer hi sukkah yeshana. What's the definition of an old sukkah? Kol sha'asa kaidim lachag shleishim yom. If you made the sukkah 30 days before Sukkot, 30 days before. Okay, you made it more than 30 days before the Yontif Sukkot. Since people are not yet thinking about the festival at that time, one who builds a sukkah that then presumably did not intend to use it for the mitzvah. But if you made it for Sukkot, you can make it at the beginning of the year, way before Sukkot, then it's going to be good. Because if you made it for Sukkot, I don't care how far it is off from Sukkot. You made it for Sukkot, according to Beis Shammai, it's good. If you didn't make it for Sukkot, it's not. Now, if you were to put up this sukkah without any major thought, right? But you did it within 30. You did it within 30 days of Sukkot. Then we say that your intention was for Sukkot. You know why? Because you're already sukkah focused. Why? Because 30 days before the holiday, we have a halacha. You have to start learning about the holiday 30 days before. So once you're already thinking about Sukkot, So then, when you put up such a thing, even without having this specific thought, you're doing the understand. It means you're putting it up the sukkahs because you're already in the sukkahs frame of mind. So even if you're not thinking specifically, I'm making this for sukkahs, then we say that's in the back of your mind. That's what you're making it for. But this is all discussion according to Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel say you don't need that, and that is the halacha. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
What if you don't have any angles to make it round?